As I said in the introduction, Matt, we're delighted to be joined by Declan Brouder, 𝘬𝘬𝘪𝘠𝘬 Sigerson manager, former Limerick selector, former Limerick 21s manager. Declan, how are you keeping?
Very good, Jack, and yourself?
Good.
Good morning,
Thanks a
Jack.
million.
Declan.
Thanks
Good
a
morning,
million
Matt. How are
for
you?
joining us this
Good.
morning. I suppose at the weekend we had the Munster final, Kerry versus Clare, a comprehensive win for Kerry, and I suppose you've dealt with an awful lot of those lads in with UL. First and foremost, how do you find the product at the moment, football, in terms of excitement, I suppose?
Yeah, it's a very good question, Jack. I think at the minute we have a mix of some brilliant games when teams are, paired together of equal standard, and then you see at the weekend you have the likes of Sligo and Clare that, go into a provincial final on a high, and then unfortunately just come up against a couple of teams that are so far ahead of them in terms of their development and their skill. So I think it's a real mix. Like, there's been some brilliant games in every provincial championship this year, but unfortunately we still have these one-sided games, and I think that for every one-sided game that we have, it seems to take away the good of maybe the 5 or 6 games that goes before it. And I think you just need to look at Munster as an example. Like, Tipperary and Waterford was a very decent game. Clare had a win for the ages down in Ennis against Cork. Limerick were, I thought, excellent in how they went about trying to take down Clare in the Munster semi-final. And, then you have Tipperary, who are well beaten by Kerry. And, I'd say Clare are very disappointed with what they produced on Sunday against Kerry, because I definitely thought that they were a bit more ready to take on a team like Kerry than some of the other teams, maybe like Tipperary, that came up against them recently.
Yeah, I suppose you've had your handprint on that Clare team with so many lads coming through UL. They're obviously doing an awful lot right in Clare, and there's probably not that many Limerick lads coming through. Can you put your finger on why is that?
Coming through with UL in compared to Clare,
even the college system in general around the country, there's only probably 4 or 5 lads on any given year.
Yeah, 4, 5. I know Matt I've heard Matt talk about that before. On the face of it, I would say, disappointing in some ways, but I suppose if you dig a bit deeper, it's not all bad either. I suppose a couple of examples, as you guys will know. John Hayes was on the UL Sigerson squad this year, played in the Sigerson final. Last year, Paul Maher captained the UL team in the Sigerson Cup final. Ronan McGilligan from Mungret has been part of the squad the last couple of years. Hugh Burke was in UL a couple of years previously. He played for UL. There's a couple of lads that we've been trying to get in that it just hasn't worked out. Rowan O'Connor, for example, has played with John O'Grady in the Freshers, played in the Fresher final a couple of years ago. But himself and maybe Brian Nixon, 1 or 2 more, were, I suppose, tied really with Newcastle West this year up until Christmas. 2 dual players got to a Premier Intermediate semi-final and obviously went to a Munster football final then with Newcastle West. So by the time their club season finished, the ship had almost sailed in that sense. Cormac Wolf is another lad who's in UL, I think was injured towards the end of last year. Again, would be somebody we'd be looking at this year. And I do know that young lads like Emmett Richter, Aaron Neville, I think some of them have their eyes set on UL as well. So, like, my point is, if you look at it just top line, you can say, God, there's not that many, but I suppose there is a few reasons for some of them, not making the step up.
What's it like, trying to find lads in UL when you've probably the bones of 20,000 students? It's not like a club where you'd nearly know everyone. Like, how hard is it to cast that net so wide in UL?
It's yeah, I know what you mean. I think there's, as you said, there's up on 20,000 students in there, but it's pretty okay, to be honest. Like, I mean, in the last couple of years, the profile of football has really risen, and like, I'd say 95% of lads will make themselves known. Inter-county managers are very good. They're an interesting bunch. When you want something out of them, they're not as easy to deal with. But when they're trying to promote somebody to get to play Sigerson football, then they have no problem reaching out as well. So I think in general, Jack, most of the footballers in UL will make themselves available, and we've been very lucky in that sense. We've a really good quality of footballer coming through the last couple of years.
Yeah, and this is my last point on the Sigerson. Matt, you might want to come back to it, but you talk about players making themselves available. You obviously had a certain David Clifford at your disposal last year. Just from seeing him up close personal, how good is he?
I would just like to offer up our condolences to David and the Clifford family from everybody in 𝘕𝘰𝘬𝘪𝘢𝘵𝘠 and obviously the wider Limerick public on the passing of his mother at the weekend. A tough time for them all, and they did what they thought was best, and they honoured her memory by making themselves available and putting on a 5-star performance for Kerry on Sunday. I mean, he's every bit as good as you can see and as you can imagine. Like, he's just absolutely top class. Things he can do on the pitch are just they're amazing, and he can inspire a room, he can inspire a pitch. The David Clifford factor is huge, and it was huge in UL. Everybody wanted to be a part of the setup that he was involved in. But I suppose when you consider that I think he might be 24 now. He was 23 when we were dealing with him. He's been an all-star for the last 3 or 4 years. Player of the year this year, and you saw what he did in the game last year. He's just an incredible young man. He takes it all in his stride. He's so easy to deal with. He's so humble. It was a real privilege to work with him.
Yeah, it's a privilege to watch him as well, I suppose. In the same token, moving on to the Tailteann Cup, obviously for Limerick, we didn't experience it last year. Obviously, Westmeath went away and won it, and it was obviously huge for them. But what's your take on the Tailteann before it obviously kicks off this weekend for Limerick?
Yeah, I think it's brilliant. I suppose I kind of alluded to it there that for some teams, there's only so far you can go before you come up against a heavy hitter, and you're sent crashing back down to earth. So I think the Tailteann, like, it's if I'm correct, it's the second year of the Tailteann now. It showed last year that it has something to offer for every county that's in it. Really, I think there's probably 5 or 6, maybe 8 counties that will fancy their chances of winning it. But equally, I think there's no team in it that anybody needs to be fearful of. I think the coverage you got last year was outstanding. I think the 2 semi-finals were played in Croke Park. The final was played before the All-Ireland semi-final. And again, that was in Croke Park. And you just see the reaction that Westmeath got when they won it. I think it has huge positives, and maybe a few teething problems last year in terms of it kind of being split geographically. But this year, I think it's a great competition, and it's one that Limerick can very much look forward to over the next couple of weeks.
Yeah, looking forward to it. I suppose to be a different pressure on Limerick, more of an expectation, whereas for the best part of the last 2 decades, there wasn't really much emphasis on Limerick winning. It was more like can we win, and we played well today. Whereas now they're going to be expected to beat the likes of Longford and Carlow and Wicklow. What will it be like for those players dealing with that?
Yeah, I think, look, that's part of the role of management and part of the role of being an inter-county player. Like, you can only control the controllables, as the saying goes. Like, if there's a narrative out there that Limerick are favourites, or Limerick have beaten these teams previously, that's not for them to worry about. They just need to focus on internal stuff that they can control themselves, stuff that contributes to getting a home win on Saturday against Longford, puts them in the driving seat. They can't worry about the so-called narrative of maybe being seeded first or being favourites in some of these matches. They just got to look after things from their own point of view and deal with what comes their way.
Yeah, and it's been an eventful year so far for Limerick. The league was very disappointing, but they showed a lot against Clare that it's more the team from 2022 that was building than a team that have just gone back completely. Like, they'll have to take the positives from the Clare game. It was obviously a missed opportunity, but you need to be building on those kind of performances.
Yeah, like, it's been a patchy year for Limerick. I mean, if you were to run through it really quickly, they ticked the first couple of boxes by getting to the McGrath Cup final. Then maybe a performance they probably wouldn't have been happy with against Cork. A very patchy league performance throughout, where, you know, I've heard Matt talk about this before, very unlucky in terms of the first two fixtures that they got. Possibly could have got something against Louth, which would have kick-started their season. Very disappointing performance against both Cork and Clare, and very good performances against Meath and Kildare. Brilliant, I would say, really, really strong performance against Clare, when I don't think the confidence, certainly outside of the camp, was very strong going into that game. And with 5 minutes to go, I really felt that game was there to be won. So I suppose the Tailteann now is kind of last chance saloon for them. You know, there's no more competitions after this one. But I would agree that if you can take the positives out of it, like Ian Corbett had to come off injured at half-time against Clare, Hugh Burke only came on at half-time, Adrian Enright was suspended for that game. The form of Cathal Downs and Barry Coleman has been refreshing, I would say, you know, in terms of young lads coming through. So if you can piece all that together, there's a lot to look forward to. But as I said, it is last chance saloon, and it really is time to start, you know, delivering on some of this now.
Yeah, and how important is it, you know, to deliver your first game at home? You are going to be favourites against a Longford team that you beat there last year, just to start the ground running, because, you know, if you lose, there'll be an awful lot of pressure on you then for your final two games. And obviously, Carlow and Wicklow in a one-off game will be difficult in their own right.
Yeah, I think it's huge, Jack. I'd be wary of Longford this weekend. I really would. You know, they're similar to Limerick. They've been patchy. Like, they won the O'Byrne Cup at the start of the year. Then they had a really poor league, but they had a very good performance against Offaly in the Leinster Championship, where, I don't know, did they lose by 1 or 2 points? Like, football is number one up in Longford. I believe they've been in Portugal since the league has ended. So I would say, you know, you're looking at a county that's targeting the Tailteann Cup. You're looking at a county that, again, it's been patchy, but they have won something this year. And you don't want to be coming out of Saturday, you know, facing into a trip to Carlow, and equally a trip somewhere to play Wicklow, who've been promoted from Division 4. You certainly don't want to be on the back foot after one. So I would be wary. I'd be on guard this weekend from a Limerick point of view.
Yeah, they're obviously a good team. Matt, I'll throw it over to you there for a few minutes.
Declan, just reflecting on the whole Division 2 thing this year, was the transition from Division 4 to Division 2 too quick? Would Limerick have benefited more and be better prepared for Division 2 had they maybe 2 or 3 years in Division 3?
I don't know, Matt. I think, I mean, possibly is I suppose is the answer when you consider that you know, Limerick came back down again so quickly, but equally, like, you're not going to, you know, turn down these opportunities when they come your way. I thought when Limerick beat Fermanagh last year in the Gaelic grounds in that final game, I thought, you know, looking at those lads from a distance, I thought they looked very impressive. They looked full of confidence. You know, they looked physical in terms of, you know, how they tugged out, like a team that I suppose have been together for a couple of years under Billy and were mature and were confident. I think they backed it up by going to Ennis and getting a win. You know, equally went to Thurles. Okay, the Munster final may not have, you know, went their way. Again, I'm sure they're disappointed with some elements of that. The biggest thing probably, Matt, for me is that, you know, there was a change in management. Like Division 2, you hear it year in, year out. It's the most competitive of all divisions that out there in footballing terms anyway. And I don't think Division 2 is a place for any management team to be kind of cutting their teeth or, you know, finding their form or getting to know a group. I think it's a real, you know, it's a real hard place to try and learn your trade. And I think that was probably the biggest, I suppose, the biggest disappointment that Limerick went into that kind of Division 2, almost trying to you know, find out about themselves again and look for a bit of familiarity from within the group and within the management that the previous management would have had.
Going into the Tailteann Cup, Declan, how important is it that relegation doesn't define Limerick's season?
I think that's you hit the nail on the head. Like that has to be put to the back of people's minds now. You got to, I suppose, draw a line under the league and start from that Munster Championship performance against Clare. I know, as we talked about, Clare were disappointed with their own performance last Sunday, but Clare are a seasoned, battle-hardy team that would provide a serious opposition for an awful lot of teams. So if Limerick can go toe to toe with them, Matt, like they did, why can't that be the starting point for Limerick's season? From there until whenever they exit the competition. So absolutely, like the league is gone now. It's time to turn to the Tailteann. It's time to build on that performance against Clare. And I think Limerick, I think they need to be ruthless if they're going to be serious about being contenders for this competition. Like they're seeded number one. They, if they can control their own destiny, they can go straight to a quarter final. And if they do that, they're only one game away from Croke Park. So it's in their hands, but it's for them now to grab it by the scruff of the neck.
Declan, I suppose Donlow Cusick stole all the headlines from last Sunday evening's Sunday game, but there was a little discussion earlier on in the Sunday game that may have got lost when Cora Stanton in particular threw the ball in again about the future of the provincial championships, and Sean Kavanagh, to a lesser degree, weighed in on it in light of what they had seen in the two provincial finals. Where do you stand on the future of the provincial championships?
Yeah, like as I said, it's I was at the Munster final on Sunday. I was there last year in Killarney. Like if you're to take it on its own, it's not the greatest spectacle when you have a team that, like in Kerry's example, the All-Ireland champions coming up, teams that are playing their football in Division 2, Division 3. There's always going to be a big gap. Equally, Galway up in Connacht were in the All-Ireland final last year. They played Sligo, who got promoted from Division 4. But as I said, I think people are forgetting the very good games along the way. I think it's as good as it can be, Matt. And without it it'll never be perfect. Like as we all know, the Munster Hurling Championship is the jewel in the crown from a hurling point of view. The Ulster Football Championship is the equivalent, maybe not as entertaining, but like for anybody that's based up north, they wouldn't give up the Ulster Championship for anything. And this weekend we're facing into what looks like it's going to be an absolutely brilliant Ulster final between Armagh and Derry. It has now been linked to the overall structure that if you take Clare, for example, you get relegated from Division 2, but if you get to a provincial final, then you play in the Sam Maguire. Like, it's very easy to give out, but I haven't heard many people come up with a solution either that's better than what's there right now. So I would think that whilst it's not perfect, it's probably as good as it can be, to be honest.
I suppose we can't have a football discussion without reference to David Clifford, and I suppose the trauma and the difficulty that the Clifford family had over the weekend. But Sean Kavanagh in particular, I think you probably saw it, was eulogising him on Sunday evening for his football prowess. And he referenced that probably the best footballer of all time. Would you go down that route?
I suppose that's a question that can only be answered, Matt, when David Clifford finishes up his football career. As I said earlier, he's 24 years of age right now, and what he's done in the game so far has been remarkable. If he avoids injury, he can play for another 10 years. Now, it's scary to think what medals or what accolades or what heights David Clifford could go to in the game over the next 10 years. Like, to watch him play football, with his brother in particular, I suppose. I always when I look at the two of them, like, they play football like they're kicking ball out their own backyard. It's effortless to them. Like, they have, such a connection themselves. It's just getting stronger in terms of their own, you know, how they understand each other's games. I think Paddy has been just a revelation the last couple of years. I think, you know, he's so important to that Kerry team as a feeder and as a link player to what Kerry do well. I think the two of them, you know, they have the world at their feet, and look, Kerry are lucky to have him, and you know, the sky's the limit for David Clifford, and you know, in terms of his skill, but equally his temperament, and you know how he can take it all in his stride.
Declan, briefly turning back to Limerick and all things Limerick, and particularly the underage structure, I suppose we were unluckily beaten in the Munster minor football final in 2021. We've reached the phase one final last year, and again this week and this year. And do you think that there's green shoots coming out of the Limerick Football Academy?
I think there is, Matt. I think, as I said, if you look at the likes of Barry Coleman and Cathal Downs this year, they've been, you know, refreshing in terms of what they brought to the senior squad. I agree with you in the 20s, and I think it's fair to point out that I think a lot of the squad are underage again next year. So that minor team that you talk about, you know, has one more year, I suppose, to build on that minor success of 2 years ago now. So I think if you look at the 20s this year, in some ways, you know, if you look at the top line, you could say it was possibly disappointing. But I think if you take into account that the bulk of that team were probably, you know, a year younger than being on the age, I think they have a lot to look forward to next year. And I know John Ryan was on with you last week. And he deserves huge credit for the work he's done with the minors, because they took a bit of a beating against, I think it was Tipperary in the first round, and I think it's this week they're now facing into a playoff final to go further in the Munster competition. So absolutely, there's always great work being done. There's people that are putting an awful lot into it. Stephen Levin is now heading up the academy. I work with Stephen in UL, and I know the passion he brings to everything that he does, and you know, the professionalism and the amount of good people that they have involved. So I think there's always green shoots for sure.
Just donning your UL hat for a while, how important is the Fitzgibbon Cup, the Sigerson Cup, in terms of providing a feeder or providing you know, future inter-county players? Because in terms of the GA hierarchy, the Sigerson Cup has gone up considerably in terms of importance in the last 10 years or so.
Yeah, I've been managing UL now for 5 years, Matt, and post-COVID, the kick that the higher education has given the Sigerson Cup compared to pre-COVID has been huge. It's worlds apart, if I'm being honest. Now, again, we've had some high-profile players which have helped UL in that sense, but in 2019 the competition was straight knockout. We had one chance, we were beaten, and we were gone. And you know, it was a tough day all round. But like, the structure of the competition since it came back has been absolutely brilliant. Couple of small issues, obviously. I'm very biased when I say this, but it still probably doesn't get the respect that it deserves. A very small tweak in terms of maybe not making making inter-county players exclusively available to their Sigerson squads while the pre-season competitions are going on, I think would be huge. So, for example, if John Hayes was on the Limerick squad, or you know, a Hugh Burke or a Paul Maher, as we said, that they would be, you know, if they were named on a Sigerson squad, that they'd be left play Sigerson in January and not be expected to play McGrath Cup. I think just a very small tweak like that would do wonders for the competition, because it's an outstanding competition, and I think I'm speaking to the converted here when I say that, but the level of football, the standard of opposition, it's outstanding. It's the closest thing to inter-county senior that's out there. You know, we would have played a lot of inter-county teams over the years, and we would have held our own with the bulk of them. And it's brilliant. And I think the bit that probably goes amiss with an awful lot of people here is that these players are mad to play Sigerson football, Fitzgibbon hurling. You know, they see it as part of their development. They see it as part of their college experience. And I think, you know, it's, as I said, it's got a lot of respect in the last couple of years. The status of it has gone up, but there's still a bit to go. But to try and go back and answer your question, how important is it? It's very important, and you only have to look at the likes of the Clare footballers. I think of the game that was on at the weekend, about 10 of them have been in UL and on the Sigerson squad over the last 10 years. So if it's used correctly, it's vitally important.
Colm O'Rourke there at the start of the year, you probably have the discharge that read about the scheduling of the Sigerson Cup, demanding that it be moved. Personally, looking at it and knowing a bit about the whole college system, that I can see or find a more suitable time for scheduling the competition.
Yeah, Colm was he on the back of 2 wins on the trot when he came out with that, and I think things have kind of gone a bit downhill for him since. And funnily enough, the players that he was on about were actually players that we were coming up against about 10 days later. So we were very clued into that rant, if we want to call it that, at the time. And look, I think it's fair to say, Matt, that as an intercounty manager, he does have a point in terms of, you know, what he's dealing with. But as I said, if there was a tweak there, that I think it was Matthew Costello or Shane Walsh were the 2 players involved. If they weren't, you know, if they were told that they had to play one or the other, i.e. that if there was a rule there that if they were on the DCU squad, they wouldn't be available to meet, then that wouldn't have been a problem. So I'm not sure it's about moving the competition. I think it's more about making a couple of tweaks to the competition. Like, there's no room to move it out. You know, the league is fast approaching when the Sigerson and the Fitzgibbon is going on. And the only other option then is to move it back. And if you move it back, what people don't realize is you're getting into exam time around Christmas or pre-Christmas, shall we say, which defeats the purpose again. So I don't know. I know in the Ashbourne, they do play 1 or 2 rounds before Christmas, and then the bulk of it is played after Christmas. Maybe a tweak like that would help in terms of getting 1 or 2 rounds, you know, done and have less to come back to after Christmas. But as I said, I think that tweak of actually maybe just leaving the intercounty player to play colleges only in January, I think that would solve an awful lot of problems. And it would equally, you know, it's important that the intercounty managers can do their thing as well. So I'm not for calling off the pre-seasons. I'm for making a couple of tweaks to them, if that makes sense.
It does indeed. Final question from me, and I can't let you go without asking you about the raging debate that's going on at the moment. And I have noticed that the narrative over the last 24 hours, there have been devious attempts to pit football against hurling, and the debate about the GAA and all that sort of stuff. What do you think of this whole thing, and what do you see a solution to it?
There's no solution to it, Matt, in the format that we've gone down, which is what I call the split season. Like, it kicks off, I'd say, is it maybe 4 to 6 weeks before Christmas, where intercounty teams start going back training, and it rolls on all the way, you know, up until an All-Ireland final in, I think it's June now. Like, we seem to have boxed ourselves into half, if maybe just over half of the year, and we're trying to serve 2 masters. We're trying to, you know, get through a hurling calendar and at the same time run a football calendar parallel to it. It's not possible to show every game each weekend. So I kind of have a bit of sympathy for the GAA and for RT in that sense. But equally, it has to be said that not showing Limerick and Clare and the likes of Cork and Tipperary and Clare and Tip, 3 games that I watched myself on GAA Go, is a form of madness. Like, it doesn't make sense to not show those games. So I think, you know, like, today's headlines will be kind of forgotten about tomorrow, and all it will take is a couple of good games this weekend, or maybe, you know, the weekend after next, I think there's a bonanza of hurling, and the likes of Kerry and Mayo is behind the paywall, and that's going to switch the argument. So, I mean, Donal Cusack is brilliant. He's a brilliant analyst. He's very passionate about hurling. And I don't think anybody could question, you know, his theory the other night, or his thoughts. But as I said, in 2 weeks' time, it's probably going to be Sean Kavanagh who's going to try to get his tuppence, you know, his opinion out there, and possibly make a few headlines for himself as well that his name will be attached to. So I do think, you know, it's a bit of a storm in a teacup. It'll change again next weekend. And I don't know what the solution is, Matt, when you're trying to condense a year, almost a year into 6 months with two codes. Personally, I'd love to see the All-Irelands just go back a couple of weeks. And I think there's merit in it, because I just remember last year, Mayo, for example, they got knocked out of the football championship very early in the year, and they didn't start their county championship until around September. They waited maybe 2 months before they decided to kick things off. And if you're to stay on the Mayo subject for a second, to think that you can win a league, a national competition on a Sunday, and be expected to be out in your provincial championship 6 days later against Roscommon, it just doesn't make sense. It's just too tight a window. And as I said, when you're throwing in hurling and TV rights and, you know, space, I struggle to see a solution, if I'm being honest.
Thanks very much. That's it from me, Declan. Many thanks.
Yeah, it's a messy one. All right. Just before you go, Declan, just on the Tailteann for Limerick, right now, what would represent a good Tailteann Cup for Limerick, in your own opinion?
I think they have a couple of targets that they need to kind of pick off bit by bit over the next couple of weeks, Jack. I think a win on Saturday night is number one. Get the ball rolling with a home victory against Longford. Get a bit of momentum. Get on the bus the week after against Carlow in confident mood, and, you know, target that number one position that they've been granted as the number one seeds as of now. I think if they get to a quarter final, then they're, you know, if we go on last year's format, they're one game away from Croke Park. You know, and if they can get to a semi-final in Croke Park, then I think you're in the mix then at that stage, and it's anybody's you know, title from there, because it's all on form, and it's in, you know, how your squad is looking injury wise. But I think bit by bit they need to target the next couple of weeks, and you know, the overall target, maybe trying to get to that semi-final place in Croke Park.
Yeah, I think that is the goal for Limerick. Declan, you've been very good with your time, well over half an hour. We did tell you off air that you probably would go overboard, but huge contribution there. Thanks very much for coming on and giving all your thoughts. I'm sure Matt will echo the sentiment, and we'll be on to you again soon. I'm sure that.
Absolutely.
Great stuff, lad.
Absolutely.
Thanks very much.
Thanks very much, Declan.
Lovely. We'll talk to you soon. Thanks. Goodbye. Bye.